Hey guys, it's time for some more tutorials. My name is Magnet, and we're going to be talking about playing the late game in Protoss versus Terran today. We're going to be looking at how to get there, managing the tech battles that will pop up when these super late game situations present themselves, and really knowing when to attack is kind of key in this matchup. A lot of Terrans will be really annoying throughout the late game and try to just peel you apart, so sometimes you might just need to survive and then keep surviving until you can finally get that one good fight. It's really all about patience. It's all about not attacking into a place you really shouldn't be, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. So let's go ahead and jump into the game if you don't mind coming with me. So like we do for these late game videos, we're usually just going to fast forward quite a bit until we get to that point. Not going to pay too much attention to the openers, considering we've talked about those a lot already, and there's a lot of other instances that we have talked about as far as different stages of the game, so go back and watch those videos if you need information on that. So it looks like just a command center first from the Terran. Protoss is going for a really normal opener, just a Nexus before any units, grabbing the mothership core right afterward. Really standard stuff to protect against a Reaper. Looks like I might have a proxy or something here from Grubby. And it looks like just a pylon so far, so I'm not sure what he's wanting to do here. There is an Oracle on the way, which we've talked a little bit about that already, just to kind of keep the Terran in the base for a little while. And we won't really start defining this as late game until we get to the point where Protoss is thinking about taking a fourth base. That's when I would call this matchup into late game. That's when you should have pretty much full upgrades. You should have Colossus and Templar tech on the field. As we can see, not a ton going on here, so we're not going to pay too much attention to that. But should have Colossus and Templar on the field. Looks like a little bit of a timing here. And you should be starting to think about, well, what's beyond Colossus and Templar? What else can I do to make this keep going? You can see just a little bit of defense here with the Nexus cannons, some force fields, blink stalkers, whatnot. Nothing too crazy going on. And we'll notice that this is also a really fast third base. So you can kind of accelerate the tempo to get into late game quicker if you feel like you have an advantage at that stage. So looks like just one forge out of Grubby, just getting up to there. But by the time the late game comes around, by the time you're thinking about taking a fourth base, which if you remember from our benchmarks, it's about 17 minutes. If you have 3-3 as far as attack and armor on there, Colossus and Templar tech all ready to go, then you should be in good shape. And we're going to get there in this game in just a little bit. So it's like preventing a drop here, going for a little bit of a timing is Grubby. Just trying to kill him, seeing what he can do here, but obviously he's not going to quite yet, considering the ghosts will be able to push this away, and he has really good upgrades to his cause. So it's just going to last for a little while, and again, we're not going to really start talking about the late game until the fourth base comes up here. So a little bit of fights going on, nothing too crazy here so far. You can see cause start to get pushed back just a little bit, and to be fair here, Grubby probably could have won at this stage of the game if he was a little bit more patient. Sometimes you can win games and not go to the late game if you can just push them back into their base and prevent them from mining from a third. But he doesn't know that this is going on, and he kind of just goes home, not realizing what kind of advantage that he's at, but it's also kind of hard to push the advantage if he has a lot of zealots here too, so I think that's why he doesn't want to attack up the ramp. So he's just going to go ahead and take a fourth base, play this a little bit more conservatively, and he's just going to continue to bludgeon him here. So a lot of times in these games, when you start to get into a lead like this, and they're trying to retake position that you've already taken over, you should really stay aggressive and kind of stay on top of them and limit their mining as much as you can, because you could end it before it goes into late game if you really played this well. But Grubby, like I said, he has a lot of zealots here. He can't afford to attack up into a position like this, or else he'll just give the game away. But again, scouting around the map here for extra bases, there's a pylon here. You could even just send one zealot around, which he's doing right now, to figure out what's going on. And for some funny reason, he doesn't actually run it over to where the base is mining. So there's still a huge supply lead for Grubby here, but that can still evaporate pretty quickly if you're not careful. So Ghost EMP is going down all over the army here, and if he continues to stick around and try to retake this position, then he's going to have trouble. Notice the supply differences now. It's really starting to narrow. And as the game goes on, from a Terran perspective, they're going to want to start making mostly Ghost Viking. So they're going to have a ton of Ghosts to EMP everything. They're going to have a ton of Vikings to kill your Colossus before they can do too much. So it's really up to you to know how to manage these micro battles and how to not engage in there just haphazardly. And we can see a lot of this game is really just Grubby engaging haphazardly and cost handling it properly because he has enough Ghosts and enough support and whatnot in order to deal with that. So he's still rallying forward some units here and there. We can see him supplementing his army, but again, this game goes on for a long time. It's a 46-minute game, and that's just because Kaz manages this so well. So I guess long story short, if you don't have a good way to deal with these ghosts, then you need to really not be too eager about engaging this army, because they're really, really strong. So what you should be doing here is you should be trying to seek up with your Templar a little bit, and if this Templar can feed back a few ghosts, like 3 or 4 here, then all of a sudden if he doesn't have EMP, this army kind of unravels pretty quickly. So all the Terran really needs to protect against is you landing storms and getting good Colossus damage off. So if you can trade out your Templar for ghost feedbacks and subsequently some storms, either on the Vikings or on top of the army somewhere, then that'll be great. I also think Grubby's having a hard time closing this because he really is kind of slow on his Colossus transition, and also his upgrades aren't spectacular either. So that's a lot of just kind of slowness here. Grubby was looking pretty far ahead, but Kaz just kind of turtled out, waited for his ghost to get everything put together, and then got into the next stage of the game. So we're going to watch most of this on 2x speed to get to the end of this, because we do have another replay to look at. I don't want this to be like an hour-long video. So, yeah. So Grubby's still just remaining patient here. One thing you can do is you can send, again, just finding these extra bases would be huge, but if you really need to switch out supply, you can attack until most of your zealots are dead and switch into something else. And by this stage of the game, you want to either have a huge advantage in Colossus, and that can be up to like 6 Colossus if you really want to, or have a ton of Templar and find a way just to get storms down on this army. One other thing I'd really like to see from Grubby is harassment in several areas to make him move around the map, rather than kind of sitting him in one position and, you know, letting him get whatever he wants as far as defensive EMPs. So not a lot going on here right now, but again, attacking in here, EMP on the army, really can't afford to eat EMPs like that, and Kaz can manage this battle just fine, assuming that he can land these EMPs. So if you get EMP'd and you don't have storms or any type of other damage, then you're going to run into a lot of trouble. The Colossus is still doing a lot here, but if you can't close the deal, then eventually the Terran's going to even up or take over the supply here. So you can see, these are not armies to be trifled with. It's not like you could just move in there and take them down. So now Grubby's kind of having to play on the defensive here, which is kind of funny considering throughout the game he was containing Kaz for most of it. But either way, if he found this base a little earlier, this would be a lot easier to close this out. And again, his composition was really zealot heavy, so most of your composition needs to be something like a good number of Colossus, a decent number of Templar. The remainder needs to be in something that's really going to help your Colossus stay alive, which is things like Stalkers. The Immortals are also good to power through Marauders and stuff like that too, so if you want to get onto multiple Robos, which we can see that Grubby is on 2, even going up to 3 is not a bad idea, just to make sure that you have the refill potential. So a big thing is that a lot of people will lose games because they get into a fight like the one we just saw, but they won't be able to refill fast enough. So you really need to make sure you have enough gateways to spend your money and enough extra buildings to continue to push out these units that need to be pushed out. Shield upgrades in the late game are not terribly essential, but they can be used. Considering most of your army is going to be EMP'd most of the time when you engage, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just the armor and attack upgrades are more important. So by this stage of the game, it really just comes down to you controlling properly and getting the right fights. So he's just checking up here with the Zealots to see what the composition is. And like we were talking about, it's going to be mostly Ghost Viking. So what you'd like to see is you'd like to see maybe 1 or 2 Templar poking up here separately, just to try and EMP some Ghosts. Because if you can EMP most of his Ghosts, and especially you need vision on this army, so if you have like an Observer or something, you can sit here. But if you can start trading a few Templar for most of the Ghosts, and just get either Storm or Feedback off before your Templar die, that's really the most important component of these battles. And we've talked about using Templar a little bit, but this is different in the sense that you need to kind of dictate the battle with your Templar. Alternatively, you could attack up there with everything and wait for the Ghosts to waste all their shots, or wait till they die to Stalkers and Zealots and stuff like that before you put your Templar up. So you need to either choose, am I more comfortable with seeking up here and trying to trade my Templar with the Ghosts, or am I more comfortable with keeping my Ghosts in the back and waiting until the Ghosts die? Or rather, more comfortable keeping my Templar in the back and waiting until the Ghosts die and then bringing the Templar up later with Storms and then getting big warp in points here. So there's also going to be some harassment you're going to have to deal with here and there as well. So you need to be willing to drop down some cannons, maybe leave some Templar back at home to prevent against that kind of stuff. But again, Grubby's not able to close the deal here because he's really getting outplayed in the Ghost versus Templar battles. The Ghosts are EMPing everything while the rest of the army kind of just sacrifices itself to kill the space. So earlier in the game we were seeing that Grubby actually had like a 70 supply lead, and now he's behind because Koss is just winning the Ghost versus High Templar battle, and I think Grubby is just trying to bludgeon him to death, thinking that he's really far ahead, but now it's at the point where he's really not. He's going to have to put in some work to get back into this game. Now, one thing you can do that we're going to see in most of this game is you can switch into a lot of Immortals here, and you can make their Viking count worthless. So if they have a lot of Vikings and you lose all your Colossus, you don't have to remake a whole bunch of Colossus in order to compete here. You can remake a lot of Immortals and just rely on your Templar and Zealots and whatnot in order to win battles. Because if you get enough Immortals, then even the Ghost EMPs don't do that much. They can EMP your Immortals and whatnot, but they won't take a lot of damage for quite a long time because you're going to be mostly eating that damage with Zealots. And if you can make a lot of their supply wasted in Vikings, you can see he's making 4 Vikings at a time. This is one good way to switch into a later game composition, is just to use a lot of Immortals and kind of get off Colossus for a little while and try to get him to the point where he has an unbalanced unit composition. Likewise, if you lose a battle, let's say with a lot of Immortals, and he has no Vikings but a ton of Ghosts, then you can switch into a lot of Colossus, like 6 or 7 Colossus, and it's going to take him a long time to respond to that with Vikings. So trying to get some unbalance that favors you with these type of compositions is going to be really a good idea to try and win these. And I can say I've won a lot of games by switching into super late game Immortals and supporting them with a lot of Zealot Warpins and Storms and stuff like that. It makes a really big difference because the Immortals can kill a lot of Marauders, which are going to be quite Marauder heavy. The Storm can kill a lot of Marines, and the Ghosts really don't do that much if there's a ton of Immortals on the ground. So you're going to see another little bit of engagement here, and you can see it's really just all about keeping these Colossus alive, but if they just have so many Vikings it's overwhelming, then you need to be willing to give up that lead. But again, this really just all comes down to Grubby being totally outplayed in the Viking versus, or rather the Ghost versus High Templar wars. He's just getting these EMP'd way too much. He's not attacking incrementally so that the Colossus and everything else leads the way and then the Storms bring up the rear, but still, like we talked about, this is a 46-minute game. It's going to be really long, but it's going to be mostly kind of a lot of the same stuff. So really, just to close out the remainder of this replay so we can get into another one, is just make sure you're continuing to always mine on 3 bases. You can see Grubby's mined out here in his natural. He's not mining in his main right now, and this is barely mining. So he's reduced down to basically 1 base's worth of mining. So you need to always be sure that you have extra bases coming up here. And like I mentioned just a little bit with these extra bases, you can drop cannons and maybe keep 1 or 2 Templar behind to storm them if they try to harass or whatnot. Cannons and Storm will actually deal with a lot of harassment really well. So that's a good idea to play that way in the late game. But this game eventually just comes down to both players really aren't mining for a long time, and Grubby just barely kind of ekes it out because he gets extra bases up here on the fringe. So I guess there's not a whole lot more to see in this replay that we haven't seen already, so let's jump into another one. And this is going to show off a little bit of a different type of style in the late game. As soon as we get there anyway. So this is going to be a different game, of course. It's still going to be from the same series, though, so it's going to be from Grubby versus Koss again. And you can see that these guys kind of change it up a little bit in the later stages of a game within the same series after playing each other for so many times. So, same series, same players, but still a very different game. And I mostly want to show late game Stargate transitions so that you guys can see what you want to do to handle those properly. So again, we're not going to pay too much attention to the openers here, considering we've already talked about those at length. Just once we get to the late game phases, when we can start talking about that. And again, that's when you're going to take a 4th base, mostly around 17 minutes or so. This one's going to be a proxy oracle, I think. Yeah, I don't think anything else makes sense here. So, proxy oracle opening. He's getting blocked by the engineering base, so that's annoying. But yeah, both players kind of just playing a little bit of a slower economic game, trying to mess the other one up in the early game. Oracle coming in here doing a little bit, nothing too important, but so Gateway's just a support, nothing too crazy here from Grubby. And again, a lot of this is about surviving drops and stuff like that, surviving multi-prong harassment. Koss is known for being rather passive Terran, so we're not going to see too much of that. We're seeing a little bit of an attack attempt here from Grubby. It's a Stargate, or rather an Oracle plus Stalker. A little timey here, but it's not going to do too much, so he's just taking his Nexus right now. We'll talk about Stargate openers in another video, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. And Grubby taking a 3rd Nexus here pretty fast, so this is one way, again, to get to the late game. If you can take your Nexuses and find ways to keep them in their base with Oracles and whatnot, so that'll be a good way to get accelerated into the late game with a lot more economy than their opponent would be expecting. Switching into Storm here before Colossus, so nothing too crazy. Finally, the Terran's able to push that out, but Should be able to hold these types of things with enough units if you can get Storm finished up. See, it's almost done here. And yeah, this is a big concern, of course, is surviving this far. So you do need to perfect your openers as far as Templar and Colossus openers, depending on whatever you're comfortable with. And he loses a Templar there. That's kind of unfortunate. He's actually going to lose his base, I think. So yeah. Still, getting the Storm on there, you can see the Marines just evaporate, and now Grubby's ahead in supply. So again, we're going to fast forward here just to get up to the right point of the game. And mostly what I want to talk about this game is transitioning into Tempest in the late game. And that's something that's a little bit harder to do, but it's super strong, and it's really annoying from a Terran perspective if you have a Protoss that's good at doing that. So a lot of Templar out here, finally getting charged. Forge upgrades are finally on the way. They're pretty late, so this is kind of a later game as far as getting going here. So defending from drops, getting Storms down, defending these units the best he can. He's actually having a pretty hard time, but still he's able to get that done. One other thing I should really mention while this game is getting charged up is that putting pylons around the map is really important. So if you can find a time to just pull a probe and drop random pylons all over the map, that'll give you various reinforcement points. It'll give you maybe information, like if they take a base over here, you'll be able to maybe see that with your pylon. So a lot of stuff can be gained from putting pylons around the map. So that's something I probably should mention about late game. Again, Grubby, now that he's taking his 4th base, let's stop and take a look at where he's at right now. His upgrades are actually pretty behind right now. He's only on +1 armor. He's waiting for... Actually, he hasn't even started +1 attack, so he's pretty far behind in terms of the upgrades, whereas Kaz has 2-2 just about to finish. This is a lot of ways that people can lose games, is if they're way behind on upgrades, then they're going to have really a hell of a time trying to get back into it. He's just going to be relying mostly on his Storms, killing a lot of units from this point, since Storms don't care about upgrades. But you really need to make sure you're staying on top of getting those upgrades going. And of course, by the 4th base, you really should be on Colossus and Templar at the same time. You can see that Grubby isn't, mostly because of how weird this game was so far. But so basically by the 4th base, you really want Colossus, Templar, and 3-3 upgrades if you can possibly handle it. That would be an ideal situation if you could get all 3. And really, finding a comfortable build to get yourself there is the best thing, which we've talked about using various different unit compositions. I know we haven't talked about opening with Colossus quite yet, but we will talk about that in the very near future. So if you can perfect the style that you really prefer the most to get you to that stage, pretty much every PvT is going to have the same unit composition by this stage. And again, that's just Colossus, Templar, stuff to support properly, whether that's Zealots or Stalkers or whatever. And again, you can see he's totally relying on his Storms to kill a lot here, and that killed like probably 10 or 12 Marines with that one Storm, so doing a lot of work here. You can see he's also doing better in the Ghost vs High Templar battles, considering he's able to get these Storms off and he's not just getting EMP'd all the time. Still just trying to stay alive is Grubby right now. Kaz is being really smart here, and he's trying to start to turtle up a little bit. He's putting up a lot of bunkers so that Grubby has a harder time engaging into this. But again, Grubby's trying to deny a 4th here with these pylons. He knows when this is going to come up. He can launch a lot of attacks based upon when he sees Kaz taking that. And if he had Colossus here, this is what I'm talking about. This is the kind of production that you need in the late game. This is a 3 Robo Colossus switch. And this is probably going to catch Kaz completely off guard, considering he has not scouted or seen anything involving Colossus so far. So if you look back in Kaz's base, his production is basically barracks. There's one starport with a reactor on it and nothing else coming up right now. So if these 3 Colossus are able to get out, there's really nothing checking against that. And this is what I'm talking about as far as getting a unit in balance. There's a lot of ghosts out here, and if there's that many Colossus, these are going to have a really hard time dealing with those, considering he doesn't have the direct response to those, which is Vikings. So this is working to Grubby's favor as far as being on this composition for too long. Another good thing to note is that one of the better ways that Terran can win is they can snipe your observers and then cloak your ghosts, or cloak their ghosts and have a field day with that. So just putting up extra cannons and having points to fall back to with your cannons is a good idea, that we haven't seen so far. I mostly want to get to the point where we see the Stargate transitions here. And I think Kaz has realized what's going on. He's starting Vikings now, but those 3 Colossus, when they come out, they're going to be totally unchecked. And he's probably going to be able to smash this army and get a decent advantage for the time being. So the EMPs are still coming down here, and they're pretty rough, but the 3 Colossus are out. And you can see there's absolutely nothing to check against this right now, and Kaz just has to turn tail and run. Grubby's still behind in supply right now, and that's just because he's been having a really hard time getting up to that stage we were talking about. His upgrades are still way behind. He's still waiting for +3 armor to even be started, but considering he's going to have a pretty decent unit composition here in the next little bit, as far as getting the Templar to support the Colossus and whatnot, and Grubby, or rather, Kaz lost a decent amount of ghosts, so he's pretty low on units right now. We'll just fast forward up until Grubby starts to make the transition we want to see. So just harassing a little bit with these Colossus, not going to throw them away or anything crazy like that. Kaz did manage to get a 4th base up. As far as harassing planetaries, they're pretty hard to do, but one trick you can do is you can just put some Stalkers on hold position over here. Considering the Zealots will just die to the planetary fire really fast, you can just hold position on some Stalkers, like maybe right here, that are outside of the planetary range, and they'll be able to at least deny some mining from those patches, maybe kill some workers and whatnot. Killing planetaries is actually pretty hard, and that's one of the better defensive points for Terran. So that's why the Immortal switch is really good in the super late game, so you can focus down planetaries really fast. But if you also have enough Stargate units, then you can do it that way too. So the Colossus count's getting pretty large here. It's about up to 6. And Storms in the late game can be focused a lot on the Vikings if you can keep your Colossus alive. So that's one way to get an advantage here in the late game, is if you have a lot of Colossus and they lose all their Vikings for some reason. So that should be the kind of the focus of your Storms. Again, we want to see the Stargate transition, which has to happen here in the next couple minutes, which I'm pretty sure. Grubby's taking a 5th base. Still just trying to harass the best he can with these Colossus and with his Stalkers and whatnot. Pretty much by this stage of the game, you should have almost every upgrade there is, and you can even include Observer Speed and Warp Prism Speed in those upgrades as well, but of course things like Blink are very essential to be able to get the right positioning on your Stalkers underneath Vikings and whatnot. So Grubby's going for a lot different style than we saw from last game. He's going for a really Colossus heavy style, and now this is when the Stargate switch happens. 3 Stargates, maybe more sometimes, and the idea here, you want to start your upgrades for your air weapons, of course. I wouldn't go double air upgrades. They're not really that essential, but the whole point by this stage in the game is either, 1, to protect your Colossus from a lot of Vikings, and that can be done with a lot of Tempests, just because the Tempests eat so much fire and they can outrange everything. But secondly, you can use the Tempest to snipe off individual ghosts. And if you can think about it, if a Tempest fires once every 3 seconds or so, if you can snipe a ghost every 3 seconds, then after 30 seconds or so, you're going to be way, way ahead in unit compositions. The best thing also about the Tempest is that it forces them to engage into you. So let's imagine we have a sort of a Tempest line right here, and the Tempests are hitting the ghosts. The only way Kaz could deal with this is if he starts running at Grubby's army, to which you could keep some Templar forward and just storm him as he approaches you. It's really one of the strongest ways to get an advantage in these late game battles, is to force him to fight you or to lose units. It's his choice. And if he's forced to fighting into you, then you're going to have good position on your Colossus. You're going to have really good position on your Templar, hopefully. And he's just going to have to walk through Storms and Colossus damage just to even start to fight your Tempest. So that's one of the best ways to get an advantage here. And I kind of wanted to show that a little bit. So now that I've explained it, let's watch it happen. You can see another kind of a big fight here. Notice how much work it takes just to kill this planetary. He lost so many Zealots in that army, and I think that was intentional, so he could start switching into Tempest. So if you can find ways to economically lose supply just to switch into these Tempests, and that'll be totally fine. See a little bit of a follow-up harassment just in case the command center was restarting and Grubby's, or rather Kaz's army wasn't there. We should see the Tempest starting here. Of course you will need a fleet beacon, so we're going to have to wait for that. There we go. And once he switches into the Tempest and gets a few good engagements with those, there's really not a whole lot that Kaz can do about it. And it's mostly just exactly what I'm talking about. It's just zoning out with the Tempest the best you can and forcing the Terran to attack into you. Here's the 3 Tempests on the way now. And 3 Tempests at a time is a good number. You can produce quite a few of them in a short amount of time. And you really don't want to go over maybe 8 Tempests. I think anything beyond that is overkill. So don't overproduce too hard on these things. You don't want like 20 Tempests, because then a big Viking count is just going to kill you. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, but 6 Tempests or so is good enough to at least force them to start engaging into you. And you can also even calculate the damage. Let's look at these ghosts. They have 100 health, so they're pretty squishy. They do have a decent amount of armor, so we can assume that they have basically like 110 health, just to be on the safe side. If you look at the Tempests, their shots deal 33 damage. So even 4 shots from a Tempest will kill a ghost, but you might lose them to Vikings and whatnot, so that's why that 6 count is decent. Just in case you lose a couple, you can still one-shot the ghosts. Also, you can look at the Viking HP as well and kind of calculate how many Tempests you'll need just to kill a Viking. But mostly you want to use these Tempests to kill ghosts so that you don't get EMP'd and your army's at full strength when you fight. So that big Archon blobs or storms and whatnot will be really good. And you can see him now, like we were talking about from the last game, starting to seek up a little more with his Templar and try to land feedbacks on this army. So having an Observer forward is also good, or having Oracle to land Revelations. So you can see a little bit of this trading here. Even just storming a little bit just to weaken these units is not a bad trade, but you'd prefer to kill the ghosts the best you can. That was a really random storm. So we can see the Tempest being incremented out now. I don't think Kos really has any idea what's going on right now, but Grubby needs to really not get EMP'd. You can see if he just takes massive EMPs, that's going to be bad news. And now Grubby's starting to get this Tempest count. It's at 6 right now, so she can start picking away at these ghosts. So you really just want to try and get position with these Tempests, maybe lead forward just a little bit, or you can have your whole army together and kind of hold position just barely within Tempest range so they can get their shots off. But it's mostly just about picking off important parts of their army with your Tempest so that you can engage properly. So Kos realizes that he's in pretty big trouble here, and if he's sloppy, he's going to have a hard time. A little bit of an engagement coming up right now. The Tempests aren't doing too much in the back. And you can see, look at the Vikings be attracted to the Tempest. If they're not microing properly, then the Tempest could take all the Viking shots, while the Colossus just kill everything on the ground. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. So if they mess up their micro, the Vikings will be naturally inclined to go fight the Tempest. And if they choose that, or if they manage to be in that situation, then your Tempests are going to eat all the damage while the Colossus just waste everything. And then all of a sudden the 6 Tempests look like a great investment because they kept your 5 Colossus alive. So again, we're just seeing this battle kind of unfold here, and the Terran army just got crushed here because the Tempests were attracting all the Viking fire. The Colossus killed whatever they wanted to, and from this point, you can kind of do whatever you want if you win a fight like that, but we didn't quite see the Tempest execution that I was talking about, mostly because the Vikings just got attracted to killing the Tempest. So, I mean, that's their choice. If they want to do that, then we'll all look at the supplies. Grubby's up by 70 supply right now, and Kos doesn't really have a bank to fall back on. So from this point, Grubby just kind of wins the game from there, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Tempest in the late game since they are a viable option. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope that you'll be back for more videos here in the very near future, because I will be. So look out for that. And of course, there are Protoss tutorials that are located in a playlist, which you can find down in the description. So look out for that, and I'll see you next time.